When I see a headline telling Americans they need $1.8 million to retire comfortably, I do not start by asking whether the headline is dramatic enough. I start by asking whether the number means anything at all, because most people hear a number like that and react in one of two ways. They either panic and think retirement is now impossible, or they shrug, assume they will somehow figure it out later, and keep spending the same way they did last month. Both reactions come from the same mistake. They treat retirement like a universal price tag. It is not. Retirement is not a number somebody prints in a survey and hands to the whole country like a parking ticket. Retirement is a cash flow equation. It is a spending problem. First, an income problem second, and only after that does it become a portfolio problem. That is the part the headlines leave out. If you tell a school teacher in Ohio, a contractor in Alabama, and a technology executive in San Jose that all three need the same $1.8 million, you are not giving them clarity. You are giving them a number with no operating system behind it. And numbers without an operating system are dangerous because they create narratives. A survey says Americans think they need $1.8 million. News outlets repeat it. Social media chews on it. Then people begin to speak about that number as if it came down from the mountain on stone tablets. But it did not. It came from survey participants. It came from sentiment. It came from perception. And perception, especially around money, is very often just anxiety wearing a necktie. I have spent my whole life around capital compounding and the arithmetic of human behavior. I can tell you this with complete confidence. The amount you need to retire is not determined by a catchy national headline. It is determined by what your life costs, what your other income sources produce, what your portfolio can safely distribute, and how honestly you are willing to live inside those numbers. If your retirement spending is modest, your required nest egg can be far smaller than people think. If your retirement spending is careless, no survey number on earth will save you. That is why I want to walk through this carefully. I want to show you why the $1.8 million retirement headline misleads so many people. I want to show you why spending is the lever most people ignore. I want to show you how one change in withdrawal rate moves your target by well over $100,000. I want to show you how Social Security, pensions, side income, and discipline saving all shrink the mountain people imagine they have to climb. And I want to show you why so many Americans feel doomed by retirement math when the real problem is not always the size of the number. It is the way they are asking the question. Let us start where this whole confusion should start. Not with how much money you have, with how much money you plan to spend. If you ask a large financial company what retirees should spend, you will often hear something that sounds neat and professional. Spend around 80% of your pre-retirement income. Sometimes 55 to 60% if your salary was higher. It sounds precise, it sounds scientific. It sounds like the kind of thing that belongs in a glossy planning brochure. But the moment you look closely, you realize it is still just a shortcut. If you made $100,000 a year and someone tells you that you should plan on spending $80,000 in retirement, that might be directionally helpful. It is not law. It is not destiny. It is not even necessarily true for you. Maybe you retire with no mortgage. Maybe your payroll taxes disappear. Maybe your commute disappears. Maybe you stop paying for business clothes, constant restaurant lunches, and all the little leakages that working life quietly creates. Maybe your spending falls sharply. Or maybe your spending rises because you finally have time to travel, help family, renovate the house, or handle the medical costs that age eventually sends to every door. The point is simple. Retirement spending is personal. It is not fixed by a percentage that some giant institution prints into a booklet. And here is the reality that should wake people up. The median retirement account balance for Americans in their mid-60s is nowhere near $1.8 million. It is dramatically lower, yet a large majority of older Americans still report that they are doing at least okay financially. Now, I am not telling you that everything is fine. I am not telling you that most people are cruising through retirement with ease. I am telling you there is an obvious disconnect between the media narrative, the idealized planning target, and the way real households actually function. That disconnect matters. Because once you accept it, you stop asking, how do I ever get to some giant round number somebody quoted in an article? And you start asking the only question that matters. What does my life cost, and how much capital does it take to support that life once I account for the income streams I already have? That is a much better question. It is also a much more profitable question, because now you are thinking like an owner instead of a headline consumer. Now let us move to the rule that dominates almost every retirement conversation. The 4% rule. Most people have heard it in some form. Take 4% of your portfolio in the first year of retirement. Adjust that dollar amount upward for inflation each year after that. Historically, over a 30-year retirement, that withdrawal rate had a high probability of not running your portfolio into the ground. That rule became famous because it gave people something they desperately wanted. A simple answer, one clean number, one elegant line, one rule they could repeat at dinner without pulling out a spreadsheet. But the more I study markets, the more suspicious I become of elegant rules that survive because people enjoy repeating them. The original 4% work was useful. It gave the public a serious framework. But it was based on a conservative case, on a limited set of asset classes, and on some harsh historical conditions. In plain English, it was built to survive ugly outcomes that matters. Because if a rule is built around one of the worst sequences a retiree could have faced, and if portfolios today are often more diversified than the original model assumed, then the rule may protect people so aggressively that many of them die with far more money than they ever needed. And that is not a trivial issue. I have seen two retirement mistakes over and over. One is obvious: spending too much too early and running short late. The other is quieter: living too cautiously, denying yourself experiences, freedom, and peace for 20 years, and then dying with a portfolio that looks impressive on paper and useless in practice. A retiree who dies with a giant untouched nest egg may have been financially safe. He may also have been financially underlived. That is not the same thing as success. So when Bill Bengen himself later suggested that a withdrawal rate closer to 4.5% or even 4.7% could be reasonable under broader portfolio assumptions, intelligent people should have paid attention, because that is not some reckless internet optimist talking. That is the man whose work gave the public the original rule, admitting that the world is more nuanced than the slogan. And nuance changes the math in a hurry. Suppose you want to spend $40,000 a year from your portfolio in retirement. At a 4% withdrawal rate, you need $1 million. Everybody understands that number because the arithmetic is clean. Now change only one variable, raise the withdrawal rate from 4% to 4.7%. Suddenly the required nest egg drops to roughly $851,000. Nothing else changed. Your desired spending did not change, your dream retirement did not change, your age did not change, only the withdrawal assumption changed. And just like that, you have removed nearly $150,000 from the target. That is why I tell people to be very careful with retirement folklore. A small assumption buried deep in the model can move the mountain by a shocking amount. Now, I want to be honest here. A higher withdrawal rate is not free money. It increases the risk that you outlive your portfolio. If you retire very early, if you are unusually conservative, if your portfolio is poorly diversified, or if your spending is inflexible, then reaching for a higher withdrawal rate simply because it feels better can be foolish. I am not arguing that everyone should move from 4% to 4.7% and celebrate. I am arguing that many people are operating with one sacred rule, when even the creator of that rule later acknowledged the picture had more moving parts. And when you are making a decision that will determine whether you spend the next 20 or 30 years afraid or free, you had better understand the moving parts. Here is the next place where people distort the problem. They treat the size of the nest egg as though it carries the entire burden by itself. But retirement income does not arrive from only one source in the real world. That is fantasy. Real retirees often have other engines running: Social Security, a pension, part-time work, a side hustle, rental income, royalties, consulting. Even small pieces matter. If you receive $1,800 a month from Social Security, that is $21,600 a year. That is real money. It is not imaginary. It is not optional. It is not a rounding error. It changes the equation. Let us go back to the person who wants to spend $40,000 a year. If Social Security covers $21,600, then the portfolio only needs to produce the remaining $18,400. Now run that through a 4.7% withdrawal rate. You no longer need anything close to $1.8 million. You do not even need $851,000. You need roughly $400,000 to $412,000, depending on how you round and how conservatively you model. Think about what just happened. One media narrative told you that you need $1.8 million. A more grounded cash flow analysis tells you that if your spending is moderate and your Social Security is ordinary, your required nest egg may be closer to a quarter of that headline number. That is a gigantic difference. And that difference does not come from optimism. It comes from using the right frame. This is why I get frustrated when retirement is discussed as though every answer begins with fear. Fear sells. Fear headlines. Fear gets clicks. But fear is a poor retirement planner. Good retirement planning asks a sequence of better questions. How much do you actually spend? Which expenses disappear in retirement? Which ones rise? What income streams continue whether your portfolio exists or not? How much of the spending burden truly lands on the portfolio, and then only then, what withdrawal framework is sensible for a household like yours? If you do not ask those questions, the $1.8 million story can do real damage. It can make a person with $450,000 and a paid-off home feel hopeless when in fact they may be closer than they think. It can make a disciplined middle-income saver underestimate the power of Social Security. It can make a younger worker assume the gap is so large that there is no point sacrificing today. And once someone concludes there is no point, they usually stop doing the small, boring things that actually create retirement security. That brings me to a truth that is both obvious and oddly ignored. Retirement is not only a portfolio event, it is a savings rate event. The amount you need matters. The speed at which you get there matters more than most people realize. If two people earn the same income and one saves 10% while the other saves 40%, they are not running the same race. They are living in different financial universes. The person saving 10% is mostly financing present life. The person saving 40% is aggressively purchasing future freedom. That distinction compounds. And compounding, as usual, is where the whole story gets interesting. Consider what happens when savings rate rises. At a 10% savings rate, retirement can be decades away. At 20%, the distance starts to compress. At 40%, the timeline changes dramatically. At 50%, 60%, or 70%, you are no longer talking about a conventional retirement at 67. You are talking about optionality. You are talking about escape velocity. You are talking about compressing a working lifetime into a much shorter period because so much more of your income is being converted into productive capital instead of disappearing into lifestyle maintenance. This is the part many people do not want to hear. The average American savings rate is weak, painfully weak, which means that for the average person, early retirement is not difficult because markets are evil or because some article says you need $1.8 million. It is difficult because too little of each dollar survives long enough to compound. That is the real battle, not the headline. The habit, if someone earning $75,000 saves 70% of that income, they can compress the retirement timeline in a shocking way. If someone earning $100,000 saves 40% and keeps doing it with discipline, early retirement stops being fantasy and starts becoming arithmetic. But if somebody earns more each year and lets every raise dissolve into housing upgrades, car upgrades, restaurant habits, travel upgrades, subscription creep, and all the little luxuries that society labels normal, then they can spend a lifetime making what looks like good money and still arrive at 60 with less freedom than they expected. I have seen that movie many times. The villain is almost never income. It is usually leakage. That is why any serious retirement plan has to move beyond abstract targets and into behavior. You can debate whether the right withdrawal rate is 4%, 4.5%, or 4.7%. You can debate how much Social Security will be worth in future decades. You can debate stock returns, valuations, inflation, and tax policy. Those debates matter, but none of them rescue a household that refuses to save. And they matter far less for the household that saves aggressively, avoids stupid fees, keeps debt under control, and lets time do the brutal and wonderful work of multiplication. If I were helping someone build a real plan instead of a fantasy, I would start with 4 things. First, define the retirement you actually want. That sounds soft. It is not soft at all. Do you want a retirement that costs $20,000 a year after Social Security? Do you want $40,000? Do you want $60,000? Do you want a simple life, a travel-heavy life, a family support life, a luxury life, or a life built around flexible time more than spending? If you do not define the retirement, you cannot define the target. And if you never define the target, your savings process drifts. People who drift almost always spend too much and save too little because there is no meaningful destination forcing the trade-offs. Second, avoid the life decisions that quietly murder compounding. This is where the future gets stolen. One oversized mortgage, one absurd car habit, one attempt to look rich before becoming rich, one flirtation with leverage, one stupid piece of credit card debt rolled month to month, one high-fee financial product sold with a smile and a brochure. The enemy of retirement is often not one catastrophe. It is recurring self-sabotage wearing the costume of adulthood. Third, plan around reality, not slogans. If you want to retire before 59 and a half, then you need to know where the income bridge comes from before retirement accounts become freely accessible. If you have a spouse, then your retirement is not a solo spreadsheet, it is a joint operating system. One person's discipline or indiscipline changes the other person's timeline. If you want children or already have them, do not pretend that will not alter the speed of compounding. It will. Children may be worth every dollar and every hour. But pretend they are free just makes the rest of the plan dishonest. A retirement plan that refuses to honor real life is not a plan. It is a drawing forth. Keep friction low. That means low investment costs. That means avoiding the urge to outsmart the market every 6 weeks. That means not confusing speculation with investing. That means not feeding your future to managers, products, or debt structures that siphon away return before you ever see it. I have said this for years in many forms. The great fortunes built in public markets were not generally built through constant excitement. They were built through long ownership, disciplined saving, sane cost structures, and time. Time remains the best accomplice in wealth building, but time only works for money you keep. Let me come back now to the emotional core of this whole argument. The reason the $1.8 million retirement number spreads so easily is that it attaches itself to 2 things people already feel: uncertainty and inadequacy. People are already worried that they started too late. They are already worried that inflation changed the rules. They are already worried that healthcare taxes and the markets will punish them just when they need security the most. Then a giant round number arrives and appears to confirm their fear. You are behind. You are not safe. You missed it. That emotional reaction is powerful. But emotion is not evidence. When I look at retirement, honestly, I do not see one giant number that applies to everyone. I see layers. I see a household that spends $35,000 a year and has $24,000 of reliable income from Social Security. I see another household that spends $90,000 a year and supports adult children, carries a mortgage, and has no pension. I see somebody who can retire with far less than the headlines say because their life is simple and their income sources are diversified. I see somebody else who could blow through $1.8 million because they never learned the difference between spending and living well. That is why I keep coming back to this point. The number is not the truth. The system behind the number is the truth. If you understand your spending, your income floor, your withdrawal assumptions, and your savings rate, then the problem becomes solvable. Not easy necessarily, but solvable. And that matters because people make far better decisions when they believe the problem is solvable. A worker in his 30s who learns that a 40% savings rate could theoretically put retirement on the table in 15 years behaves differently than a worker who believes he needs some impossible millions, only threshold, and therefore may as well give up. A couple in their late 50s who realize Social Security meaningfully reduces the portfolio burden can stop panicking and start planning. A family that understands lifestyle creep is the enemy can preserve the compounding runway that most households unknowingly destroy. The hidden gift in all of this is that once you reject the lazy headline, you get your agency back. Now, I do not want to leave you with false comfort. Retirement is still hard. Inflation is still real. Healthcare is still expensive. Markets can still deliver ugly sequences. People do still save too little. And many Americans will reach retirement with balances that are thinner than they hoped. I am not here to pat everybody on the head and tell them it all works out. I am here to tell you that the solution is more precise than the panic. You do not solve retirement by worshiping a survey number. You solve it by getting brutally clear on your own arithmetic. What do you spend? What can you cut? What income arrives no matter what? What can your portfolio safely support? How much of every dollar are you actually keeping right now? And are you willing to let that percentage rise enough long enough for compounding to do its job? If you can answer those questions honestly, you are already far ahead of the average person reacting emotionally to a number they saw in a headline. When people ask me how much they need to retire, they usually want one sentence. I never give it to them because one sentence is how people got misled in the first place. What I tell them is this: you may need a lot less than the media says if your spending is low, your other income is meaningful, and your saving behavior is strong. You may need a lot more than the media says if your spending is careless, your assumptions are lazy, and your life is built on fixed costs that keep rising. Retirement is not a prize number. It is a relationship between what you own, what you spend, what you keep, and how long you give those forces to work. The person who understands that can build a retirement with clarity. The person who does not understand it will spend years chasing or fearing the wrong number. And in money, as in most of life, asking the wrong question for too long can be very expensive. If you want the simplest way I know to frame this, here it is. A retirement target is not what sounds impressive. It is what your life actually requires. Anything above that is margin. Anything below that is risk. And the intelligent investor does not begin with the margin or the risk. He begins with reality, because once you do that, the whole $1.8 million lie starts to look less like a law of nature and more like what it really is, a loud number attached to a quiet misunderstanding.